session started. Thank you so much for showing up to this very interesting panel discussion we're going to have. I'm thrilled to be the moderator for this particular session, where we will dive into the vital role of measurements in international trade. So international trade has and still plays a very important role in sustainable development. However, the keeping of track of all the flows of goods and services becomes very difficult, and that's where measurements come into place to simplify the process a bit. And they become, by such, also the backbone of trust and transparency for the global marketplace. So it helps us in quantifying and measuring accurately greenhouse gas emissions, upholding environmental standards, and also ensuring that sustainability commitments that we have also not just remain words, but turns into action. So in this session, we'll explore how measurements do support international trade sustainably, paired with standards, regulatory frameworks, and also other components of the quality infrastructure that should empower nations and businesses to push sustainable trade practices forward. And for that discussion, I have with me an esteemed panel, a brilliant one, with me to uncover how measurement and science isn't just about precision, it's about building a sustainable future that we can all believe in. And if I start from my left, we have with us Bob Joseph Matthew, who is the president of the International Organization of Legal Metrology, OIML. Welcome, Bob. Then we can continue with Martin Milton, who is the director at the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, BIPM. Welcome, Martin. Good to have you with us. You can also see there Kamala Mamadzada, who is the Deputy General Director and the Director of the Department of Standardization here at the Azerbaijan Standards Institution. So welcome to you. All right, and we will have approximately an hour for us, and we will have another panel person joining a little bit later, who is Anil Mishra, the Chief of Section for Hydrological Systems, Climate Change and Adaptation at UNESCO. 1 hour in front of us, and I wanted to maybe start pretty generally, just to get a grasp of what we're talking about. So if we are at the Standards Pavilion, by the way, for everybody else joining online, listening to this session, standards important, measurement regulation important, but how do these two combine to contribute more to sustainable trade practices? Can we get a glimpse of that, Bob?
Yeah. Thank you for moderating and giving me the word. So perhaps we want to talk about measurements, understand a little bit where we come from. So metrology is, to many people, not a known expression. Metrology is the science of measurement and its application. So when it comes to legal metrology, it is about exact measurements and in which situation they are required for trade. And this is what we try to bring into. And here the aim of us in this discussion is to show the different pillars of the quality infrastructure, how they play with each other, what's the interplay. Coming back to your initial questions, how can standards and measurement regulation contribute to a more sustainable practice? When I just look at it from a legal metrology perspective, it is in the area of ensuring fair trade. For instance, by regulating the accuracy of measuring instruments, legal metrology prevents fraud and ensures that quantities are precisely measured and precisely recognized in trade. It has also another impact in terms of sustainability. Let's talk about reducing waste, which is a huge important topic when it comes to sustainability. By adapting the processes through using accurate measurements, you can achieve the reduction of waste, such as an example. Another thing when we talk about regulation, and in this context, is also regulation should never prohibit innovation. It's the contrary, it should support innovation. So legal metrology standards, in the ideal world, should also encourage the development of new technologies and innovations that can lead to more sustainable practices. This is especially in the area of energy efficiency very relevant. Another area which we didn't touch upon, but when you think about the end user, us, the consumer protection is also a very important area. But this all is very much dependent on science of metrology.
Yeah, maybe Martin, you can continue on that because you bring with your expertise in measurement science. So what would you say on that question with standards and regulation? How do they interplay for sustainable trade practices?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. So I'm from the BIPM, the International Bureau of Weights and Measures, the Bureau International des Poids et Mesures, our name in French. Next year we're 150 years old. We were founded when the Meter Convention was signed in Paris in 1875. That convention was signed because at that time in the world there was a need for a coherent measurement system that all nations could agree upon. And it was decided that the system actually that had been developed in France would be the one that was technically superior. So we were commissioned as an international organisation to prepare those first standards of the meter and the kilogram so that all nations involved could agree on what a measurement in meters or a measurement in kilograms was. That's 150 years ago. Things have expanded enormously since then. Our work and the work of the labs in the member states around the world now includes measurements of all types of quantity, all types of units. So let me say a little bit about how that works in the context of trade. When we talk about the impact, the role of scientific metrology in trade, we always talk about the role of what we call quality infrastructure. I think that's one of the things that will come up today. So quality infrastructure is this collaboration between the organizations that set standards, documentary standards for how measurements should be done on one side, and on the other side, organizations who put in place actual physical standards to ensure that those measurements are correct and can be traced back to agreed international standards. So that is the whole picture of quality infrastructure. Now we tend to talk about it in terms of having 4 subsections. We talk about scientific metrology, legal metrology, we talk about standards, and then we talk about the overlay of accreditation to ensure that the system works. So let me give examples relevant to this sort of gathering. This meeting, of course, is very much about energy and the importance of reducing carbon emissions associated with energy usage. So particular examples of how our current system for trade works would be with natural gas. Natural gas is a very widely traded quantity, an incredibly high value, an incredibly high value product. So as a result, over the years, there's been a lot of investment in the quality infrastructure system needed to ensure that natural gas is traded on a fair basis. There are labs that can measure the components of natural gas. Those components of natural gas can be used to calculate the energy content of natural gas. So on one side, the energy content calculation, that's governed by standards from ISO. Those measurements of the components, those are traceable to standards in national labs in the system that BIPM coordinates, who can ensure that a measurement of methane, for instance, is the same in every one of the 100 nations who take part in our system of mutual recognition. That's an example of natural gas. I could give the same example actually for electricity. Electricity, it seems to be something that just flows by magic. Actually, it's an incredibly high value product that has to be measured, and when it moves between countries, when it moves between organizations, between companies, the value, the power of that electricity has to be measured. That's done by high accuracy measurements of the voltage and the current in order to ensure that the power that's transferred, the energy that's transferred, can actually be accounted for and paid for accurately. So those would be 2 examples of how the system works today.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Martin. I think we're going to come back to both consumer needs, because that's a very important question that we're going to have, and also Martin, quality infrastructure, the components of it, how everything is interrelated. I think that will come back too. And in the meantime, we have our 4th speaker as well. Welcome to the panel. Just sit there, make yourself comfortable, and soon we'll also have a little bit of discussions on hydrological systems, climate change and adaptation, that I think you can contribute with very much. I think you need a microphone, Anil, just to make sure that you have that, so please turn to the people in the corner. And then we'll come back to you as well. Something that I wanted to address with you two first before going to Kamala, because you bring the local perspective on this discussion as well, the standards perspective. What do you do? Do you see any gaps currently in the standards and regulation space that should be filled or could be filled, where you've already maybe are working on it?
The gaps are always related in our area to technological development. Is very important to take into account. So everything that is related to digitalization, software, or so-called AI, all these have certainly an impact on when it comes to measuring instruments, how they will be used, how they will be applied. And this is why I am such a big proclaimer of trying to make regulation technology independent. And this is where you can avoid gaps, but you will never fulfill gaps. That's the first take on it.
Martin, do you have anything to add?
Yeah. So I can't tell you, as a famous speaker said, about the unknown unknowns, but I can talk about the known unknowns. So, as Bob Joseph indicated, there are areas where the system is developing where we know there is more to be done. I gave an example there of natural gas. That's a very, very mature system that I think from the standards perspective works very well. That whole system now needs to move over to be able to follow gaseous fuels that involve hydrogen. There's a lot of work in labs to track the measurement issues of hydrogen, which are quite different actually to natural gas. Then there are e-fuels or other liquid fuels. There are new types of liquid fuels coming on. So those will be in my category of known unknowns, areas where we know we have to do more.
Perfect, thank you, Martin. And I think emerging technologies are also one of the topics that we will come back to. But first to you, because you mentioned the standards perspective and how it works, and Kamal, you bring that with us today in this discussion. So please, how do you see the role of standards in this discussion?
Thank you. As I am a representative of national standard body, I would like to discuss how the action of developing, implementing, and adopting and ensuring compliance with standards actively contribute to sustainable trading practices, fostering a global culture of sustainability that benefit us all. First, developing standards is not merely about setting benchmarks. It's about aligning with this benchmark with both national priorities and international agreements. These alignments ensure that our trade standard incorporate essential environmental, social and economical criteria which companies around the world must follow. By embedding these criteria in global trade practices, we foster a more sustainable trade environment that respects our planet and its people. Second, the implementation of the standard is crucial. It involves equipment our central authorities with the tools and knowledge to effectively communicate the standards to local producers and exporters. This is more than administrative work. It's about empowering our local businesses, industries, with the training and resources needed to align their operations with global sustainability goals. This step is essential for transforming our local businesses into a leader in sustainable practices. Third, we must focus on adapting to foreign regulations. In an interconnected world, we understanding and complying with the technical standards of the other countries is imperative. This adaptability is key to our economic growth, as it facilitates easier access to international markets for goods that are produced sustainable. It ensures that our products are not only welcomed, but also preferred on the global stage. Last, we must ensure compliance through robust conformity assessment systems and accredited agencies. These bodies play a pivotal role in verifying that our practices meet international sustainable standards. Their work builds global trust in our products, making it easier for goods that comply with this high standard to succeed internationally. This not only support our economy, but also set a global benchmark for quality and sustainability. Through these concrete efforts, standards and measurement regulation provide a solid framework and that supports environmentally and socially responsible trade. Standards unify trade practices, creating consistency and quality benchmarks recognized globally. By setting clear guidelines on sustainable production methods, these standards help businesses eco-friendly and ethical criteria that resonate with today's conscious consumers. Azerbaijan Standardization Institute has adopted a number of sustainable development standards as national standards. For example, ISO 14001 family of standards for environmental management system, which details practical tools for organizations to manage the impact of their activities on the environment. ISO 50001 energy management system helps organizations of all kinds to use energy more efficiently and effectively through the development of and implementation of energy management system. ISO 22000 family of standard on food safety management helps organizations identify and control food safety hazards. And ISO 17025 is useful for any organizations that perform testing, sampling, or calibration and want reliable results. It also helps facilitate cooperation between laboratories and other bodies by generating wider acceptance of results between countries. ISO 26000 guidance on social responsibility. These standards provide guidance on how businesses and organizations can operate in an ethical and transparent way that contributes to sustainable development. We understand that standard and measurement regulation are not just guidelines, they are foundation tools in sustainable trade. And by ensuring accountability, facilitating market access, and fostering ethical practices, they help transform trade into a force for sustainable development globally.
Thank you, Kamala, very much. You can see clearly that there's a very good interrelation between legal metrology, measurement science, standards. What about the hydrological systems and climate change adaptation? How do you see that playing a role into that, and vice versa also? How do you think sustainable practices affect the area where you have expertise in?
Thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
First of all, apologies. I was attending another session which was in the city, so I had to commit. In terms of hydrology, in the context of climate change, and I'll come to standardization, we call now stationarity is dead. What does that mean? That means that past is no longer relevant to future forecast. We design infrastructure on the basis of 100-year flood, 200-year flood. The design criteria is set according to that belief or probability that this frequency of flood will happen every 100 years. But what is happening now? Look at this Spain. The flood devastated. Didn't they have monitoring system? They did. But because of the variability, because of the uncertainty, your probability is not working anymore. In this context, I would like to quote Einstein, who once said, God doesn't play dice, but we are playing dice with the projections. And in that sense also, now when we come to hydrological monitoring, sometimes we can say we have lots of satellite data, we can track real time, but you have to calibrate, you have to validate. And sometimes you also need to incorporate the local system. So that is missing. And I think the standardization needs to consider also citizen science. We have now 3D printers, low-cost sensors, how to really calibrate the global projection coming from satellite observation, how to calibrate that for the local needs. That is something that we have the opportunity also. So there are challenges, but there are opportunity. And one of the things that I would like to highlight, this is a decade, International Decade of Science for Sustainable Development. And this is exactly the moment that we need to address those questions. We have opportunities, but we have to do more.
And I was already looking forward to the consumer and society perspective in this discussion that you already alluded to. So that's going, I think, to be a little bit of the continuation of this discussion, because standards and technical regulations can, of course, support in this. But if it fits into a quality infrastructure, how does it fit? And how does it work for consumers and society in order to give also better offerings and take that under consideration? I would like to know a little bit more from you on that perspective. How are these affected and what can we do?
There are several aspects to take into consideration to what you said, but generally, if you want to achieve something, I think this was already in all other panels also mentioned, we need to have a certain harmonization. It means globally recognized best practices. It can be for the examples you have given just before, Anil, can be for many others, but you have to come to a level where you have harmonization. That's why it's very important, and that's why we also have this diverse panel to achieve this kind of common understanding and work on getting there. The other thing is, you were saying we're kind of living in a disruptive world when it comes to the events that are happening. And nevertheless, I think through measurement, you can at least understand if there is a consistency or a reliability of what your models predict. However, there's another axis, sounds a little bit like an outcry in that sense, but it's also not only the systems or the science can help, it's also the human being who in his or her own behavior contributes a lot to how the system could work. I was also mentioning innovation. It's definitely an area. But overall, the standards that should be coordinated and the regulations that we bring in should promote these kind of practices. What measurements can help is to make understand which limits or which levels you want to have defined as a requirement to achieve or not to be overstepped. And this is where I think we can all, from my perspective, contribute. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bob. And maybe just a short follow-up question to you before we move on to the rest of the panel. You mentioned in the beginning the harmonization of requirements, and I think that was also called by Sergio Mujica, who is the Secretary General of ISO, who said that harmonization should, of course, be always taken into consideration first, instead of just moving forward with each of its own standards, so to speak. So what would you see are those benefits of harmonizing requirements, but also what are the challenges right now? Is there anything hindering us from aligning those requirements?
There are several obstacles to overcome. One is actually, and this is why this idea of the standards pavilion is very nice. We are under one roof. We should also work in daily life like being under one roof. We know we exist, and still we could do even more in that respect. It's not a criticism as such, it's more a statement and kind of a demand that we should work closely together. That's one thing. The other area is that we need to be also very open and flexible in general. This is something we need to aim for, just like two aspects to give.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Martin, for you, the perspective of consumer and society in this question, how does this all interplay between each other? We have technical regulations, we have standards. What is the focus of the consumer, and how are you reaching out to them? How are you taking them under consideration?
Thank you. So I wonder if I could take the answer to that question back to something that Anil raised. He was talking about the new world we're in. Where citizens are rightly extremely concerned about impact of extreme events and what is the standards base, what is the measurement base that is contributing to protect people all around the world. We've heard at this meeting a commitment at United Nations level, at state level, for early warning for all. So what is the measurement standards underpinning for early warning for all? It takes the systems that we've talked about here into a new area where the data is generated by remote sensing systems, by satellites. The data is generated by highly diverse monitoring systems, locally based, even to taking on board citizen data. which I think is going to be a very important part of early warning in the future. So I think it's a great challenge to us on the standard side, on the measurement standard side, to find ways to develop what we can do so that we can bring the benefits of standardization to remote sensing data, to network data, and even, and it's very ambitious, to citizen data. I mean, we know the revolution of the access to citizen data, the access to citizen data effectively exchanged, all the mechanisms we know about. But how do we provide a basis for that so that citizen data that is exchanged about rainfall, about hailstone size, wind perception, snow, all of these things, what's the standards basis for that? So that that sort of data, which is so powerful for protecting citizens, can be on a basis that it becomes trustworthy.
And you did very right in also referring back to Anil, because I'm going to do the same now, because you mentioned validation, and the relation to citizen data is very important there. So when we look at validation and validation perspective, how does that look like? How can we validate all of these issues that we might having in this area?
Of course, we continue to rely on scientific frontier, scientific advancement. But what we need to do now, because stakeholders needs to be taken on board, then we need to create buy-in effect. So one of the things that we can do from science perspective is open science. You open the process, you open calibration, open validation, open software, open hardware. You don't need to longer, you no need to hide, these expensive hardware or software. People can generate these days actually, then you can create buy-in effect with the stakeholders. And that will probably also answer what keep people awake at night. For instance, from water source perspective, for a water source manager, what keeps him awake at night? He needs to probably fulfill meeting water demand for agriculture or for sanitation system, the flow forecasting system, the recession flow system, drought. And when you have stakeholder engaged in every processes through open science platform, he needs to communicate very easily, and you have your stakeholder on your board so you can take appropriate decision.
Kamala, related to that, we also have the standards perspective that is very much integrated in this question. How does it look from your side into the interplay between quality infrastructure, its components, standards, and regulations?
Measurement standard and technical regulations are a core component of a broader quality infrastructure, which includes metrology, standardization, testing, certification, and accreditation. And in Azerbaijan, the State Service for Anti-Monopoly and Consumer Market Control under the Ministry of Economy is responsible for the quality infrastructure. And Azerbaijan Standardization Institute and Azerbaijan Metrology Institute and Azerbaijan Accreditation Center operate under the State Service. Azerbaijan Standardization Institute's primary operational areas include the preparation and adoption of standard, coordination of technical committees, coordination of certification and conformity assessment activities, along with the organization of trainings and certifications for management system based on international standard. Astant actively represents our country in various international and regional organizations, including ISO, IEC, SMIC, and fosters cooperation with the standards bodies of foreign countries. Azerbaijan Metrology Institute carries out state regulation in ensuring the unity of measurements, and it has advanced technical capabilities in the field of metrology. The institute is the holder of national standards of the Republic of Azerbaijan. In addition, it also carries out verification and calibration of measuring instruments. And Metrology Institute also represents our country in international and regional metrology organization, including OML. And Azerbaijan Accreditation Center performs accreditation of conformity assessment bodies, testing and calibration laboratories, certification bodies, inspection bodies. It has been a Category B member of the EA, European Accreditation Organization, and ILOC, an association member of the ILOC of the International Laboratory Accreditation Corporation. In Azerbaijan, QI infrastructure institutions are comprehensively governed by a set of laws, specific laws. There are a law on standardization. This law outlines the process of developing, approving, and implementing of standards within Azerbaijan. Law on technical regulation. The focus here on establishing mandatory requirements for products and processes. Law on ensuring environmental measurements. This law regulates measurement procedures across various fields, ensuring accuracy and reliability in measurements. And the law on accreditation is the field of conformity assessment. It governs the accreditation processes for organizations and ensuring accuracy and reliability and measurements. And together these laws create a structured and effective system that support Azerbaijan QI institution is in aligning local practices with global standards, enhancing the quality and competitiveness of national products and services, and ensuring the consumer rights are protected. Enhancing national quality infrastructure to meet global standards is a strategic move that strengthens competitiveness, promotes sustainable development, and aligns local practices with international expectation. For this purpose, a state program on harmonization of the national standardization system with international requirements has been approved. And according to the action plan of the state program, a series of measures are set to be undertaken, such as the establishment of a risk-based state control system aimed to ensure safety of products subject to technical regulation, incorporation of advanced technologies and innovative approach with the technical regulation and standardization, and the enhancement of laboratory networks and establishment of new laboratories that conform to modern standards. Measurement standards and technical regulations strengthen the quality infrastructure, creating harmonized systems that support quality compliance and sustainability.
And that's very interesting, because now I'm looking at the different examples that you've given: risk-based control systems, collaboration, open science, measurement science. All of these, of course, interplay with each other, and there might be much more needed to improve all of this process that we have. What do you think is needed more than what we already mentioned in order to improve these measurement standards?
Perhaps I just come back first to the examples that were given by Anil. I would like
Please.
to expand a little bit on that and also on what Kamala said. One key element is stakeholder engagement. But I would not stop, we were talking about open science, I would enlarge it. There are so many different stakeholders. The science is one part of it. It is also industry, it's the consumer, the end user, the society as such, environmental organizations, governments. They all have their stake in this part of the discussion, but the common interest should unify them, which is have sustainable systems alive. And you were giving this real-world example of using data as metrics, and this is where I want to go on. It's important that we integrate the sustainability matrix. It's needed to be discussed. It needs to be defined what it would be. This is where the science comes into place. But from my perspective, measurement standards can help developing these, but also can help society to make more informed decisions. I mean, a good example would be on carbon. And here I would like to pass on to Martin, because that's a very good example to emphasize and describe what I was talking about.
Martin, please.
Thanks for bringing up the topic of carbon. I mean, it's the big theme of the conference, isn't it? Carbon,
yeah,
and
exactly.
Commitments are about being net zero. What does that mean? It means zero carbon. But what is zero carbon? How do we ensure that a proposed scheme is zero carbon? At some point, there has to be a measurement basis there. Now, a lot of schemes are evaluated based on standard data that's been agreed as being appropriate for the factors of emission for a particular type of process. I mean, that's okay, providing that data was good data in the first place. Sometimes these things are evaluated by direct measurement. Again, there's a measurement implication. So where are we with measuring carbon? I gave the example right at the beginning of natural gas. That's probably the first type of carbon measurement there ever was. You know, it's mainly methane, but it's not all methane, but we're very, very good at measuring it. The challenge is out there now to measure carbon in more complex situations. So let's give an example of emissions. Industry in conducting its business emits carbon dioxide. It's one of the big concerns. How does one measure carbon dioxide accurately at point of source? So it requires a measurement of the concentration, noting that the temperature and pressure could be varying, but also the flow. These are quite complex measurements to make at tens of millions of locations. So satellite sensing becomes part of the equation. We want satellites to be able to measure those sources. And in order to be sure that a satellite is measuring the right thing, we'll need systems of ground truth, where there are sources that are measured very carefully. Same thing is measured very carefully on the ground. The same thing is measured from space. And then we can be sure that we have a network, or what you might call a fiducial network, a reference network of point sources around the globe that we can trust. That can then be the basis for a remote sensing system for carbon. So I mention this in sort of exploratory terms because this is the edge that the network of national metrology labs around the world is working in their own countries with government stakeholders, with industry who are concerned to be able to declare the right data when they have to declare or even trade carbon, that they have the right data and that data is on a basis that can be agreed by other countries around the world.
Bob, do you have any reflections on the information provided here?
Yes.
Example?
That's the reason why I asked you to give the example, because this is exactly the point where we have to get to. It was a good example but that's where the stakeholder engagement is becoming so important. If the scientists give you the pure figures and the overall situation is described, nevertheless, there needs to be compromises made. Compromise needs to be taken on a national, regional, and international level. And this is where we, as a group, as an organization, or as a community, need to work on. It is really key to achieve that type of harmonization. Then, to get there, we need to work on the standards. And this is, I would say, it can only work if it's bottom up. And that's why I was asking for this example, because it shows very well, even if you have the facts, you have to then know what to do with it. But you can apply this also on another aspect of the overall discussion, and I just flip it a little bit to another side. Which the other overarching topic of this COP is the financing of everything. Measurements are often used for financing because the measurements are involved in trade. They're related to consumption or in health, etc. There are so many aspects. But everyone, and you said it initially, says you have trust in it. And this is also an aspect of this whole. If you want to finance, you need to be sure that whatever metric, whatever KPI you're measuring, that it is correctly measured. So this is where it comes into. But the standards also tell you perhaps what you have to follow. And it has to fit into a system that is accepted by everyone. The fiscal interest is enormous behind it. You will not achieve anything if you are not able to finance it. And this is where I want to get to. The measurements will be credible, and a huge challenge we have.
And one of the main challenges is also what you alluded to in the beginning of your answer, the consumer. How do you involve the consumer today in these processes? Are they aware of the process? How do they contribute, and how are they affected by it? Because the consumer is also in the focus, I think, of standardization every time. How do we involve them? How do you involve them?
So, of course, there are different. On a national level, it depends very much on your kind of consultation process. So in the country where I live, in Switzerland, you have a very standard way of consulting of different circles, and it depending if it's on a low level, even the people can vote if they want to accept changes in the law. Other countries have different approaches. As international organization, you assume, you work with the assumptions, you assume that those who represent the states, they will have kind of a consensus for that state, that they, in this consensus, you have consumers in that sense represented.
Right. And Martin, do you interact at all with consumers from the measurement science point of view?
So the contact between measurement science and consumers is in the hands of the national labs. Our work is to provide the forum to coordinate the national. We don't coordinate the labs, but we provide the forum when they can coordinate. Exactly as Bob Joseph indicated, the nature and depth and technical detail of consumer engagement is a country-specific choice. Different countries have historically done it in different ways.
Right. And just because I think we alluded to in the beginning, and Neil, you also mentioned it with the water situation, and if we look at water scarcity today, it's already put in a global context because climate change is in a global context. Now, when we look at products in trade that are exported and imported across countries, you talk a lot about virtual water as well, because it's embedded in the production of those products. How do you see measurement play a role in that discussion?
I think it has a profound role. For why? Because out of the total runoff available in the river system, humanity is using about 25% in the river system. So we have lots of water, but we don't have water when we need it, where we need it. So there is a space-time equation needs to be solved, and water management issue needs to be solved. Now, virtual water, we have to think about efficiency. For instance, agriculture takes more than 70% of the water, but it is also not very efficiently used. In India, the groundwater exploitation, for instance, drawdown of groundwater in Gujarat, you can see the situation, okay? So how to improve efficiency? Then again, the measurement comes. You are drawing water last year from maybe 100 meter, just giving an example, X meter, now you are going 200 meter. So you need to have that capacity, but how to use it efficiently? And then because of the climate change, perhaps you need to think about less water intensity crops, and the virtual water trade will also depend on that. If you start growing something you are not growing in the past, your virtual trade will have a different equation. So we need to consider all aspects. And I want to emphasize once again, and it's very important, in the past, and particularly in my domain, in hydrological science domain, we rely very much on science, but also with the less measurement. Now we have to open it. We have to make it open hydrology, open science, but with the engagement of all the stakeholders, and citizens has a great role to play.
And that's a very good, because I see you nodding, Martin. I was just about to put the question back to you again. You agree with this? Hydrology is based on measurement science and relies on it. How do you feel about this water scarcity problem and what measurement science can do in it?
I don't have particular case studies on hydrology, but I think it's a great example from the community that Anil talks about we're back to this topic of citizen science. How do we take measurements that are really at a village level, the depth of the well, the movement of the water table in a village, how do we integrate that up to create the correct global picture and then trigger global early warning systems?
And can we do that by standards, Kamala? How can measurement standards be improved to do this?
I think the forward-looking approach is essential to make standards and more effective and responsive to sustainable and consumer needs. The current situation here is with limited standards for meteorological assurance and collaboration can create challenges for enterprises and service providers in meteorology and collaboration fields. This can impact product quality and process accuracy, potentially compromising consumer rights. To address this, the establishment of a national technical committee on metrology under the Azerbaijan Metrology Institute is a significant step forward. The committee's goal is to develop a national standard for the calibration and verification of measuring instruments and standard samples. This initiative includes active participations from public and private organizations, associations, and academia, ensuring diverse expertise in standard development. And continuously engage a broader range of stakeholders in the standard development processes can help ensure that the standards comprehensively address both consumer and environmental concerns. According to the mentioned state program, the goal is to prepare national technical regulations in the field of measuring instruments. And these regulations reference a series of harmonized standards focusing on test methods, measuring accuracy, and equipment specifications. And the technical committee's action plan incorporates these referenced standards. This approach not only addresses current gaps, but also aligns national practices with the international standards and facilitating enhanced trade relations and market access for our products. Work towards greater harmonization of standards at the international level can help reduce trade barriers and promote global best practices in sustainability, making it easier for businesses to adopt and apply to high standard uniformly across borders.
Thank you all for the discussion thus far. We're approaching the end here. So just to summarize and maybe open up to the audience here as well, if you have any questions, please raise your hand so I can come up to you with a microphone. I think the collaboration is needed, harmonizing requirements is needed, open science we heard about, and all of these different actors have to interplay in order to make this happen, right? If we go to the first question from the audience here.
Oh, hi, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Colin. I'm from UL Standards Engagement. So we are an organization that develops standards. So this panel is very interesting. I reflect a lot from hearing from everyone. So we spoke about standards harmonization. So we also want to harmonize our standards with all other standards developing organizations. And then but one thing is that I think we need to have trust, right? So a lot of our standards are based on data and numbers and measurements. So can you explain a little bit more on what is the OIML or BIPM is doing to build that trust so that one measurement can be accepted everywhere so that all different countries can trust different standards for harmonization? Thank you.
How would you answer, Martin, Bob?
Well, I will start, you complete, or we, as usual. The thing is, actually, to be honest, I'm not joking, it's like actually we should answer it together. That's the first step to achieve what you're saying. Because as it works, legal metrologists and scientific metrologists, we work very closely together. Where I live in Switzerland, for instance, we have the scientific and the legal metrology under one roof. And when we develop regulation, we work closely together. But it's the same with OIML. The experts that are working on these regulations, or so-called recommendations, are usually people from NMIs, which also work in projects at the BIPM. So this is how we can, A, make sure that we're on the right track, and B, that it's trusted and there's a confidence in it because we have kind of a harmonized global approach when it comes to these recommendations.
Yeah, so I think your question is about the role of the standards development body. OIML is a standards development body like ISO, preparing the standards based on the best input, or accepted input, consensus built between experts in every nation involved. And on our side, the measurement standards basis. So whereas standards development bodies provide accepted documents that are available for use globally, our standards are accepted through a system that we call the Mutual Recognition Agreement, which covers 250 labs in 100 nations. The capabilities of those labs is listed in a great database that we maintain. every measurement capability, and there are 25,000 actually in the database that is in there, is recognized by all of the countries who sign up to the system. So when the standards development bodies call upon a specific type of capability, our mutual recognition database shows where that capability is available in 101 countries in the world, and the extent to which it is recognized by the other 100 countries in the world based on the performance, based on the requirements in the standards. So that's how the two sides of the house, if you like, work together, and that's the point we meet.
Perfect. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Bob. Any additional questions? One last question for today.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very useful insight. My name is Abdurrahman John. I'm from Senegal, the standards body of Senegal. So I have two questions. The first is we are having a lot of discussion in Senegal about how we should organize the metrology system. We have a legal metrology which is operational, industrial and scientific which is not very much. So the question is, would you recommend to have all the aspects of meteorology into one body, or separate them, which is the best practice? And the second question, since we are talking about climate change, could you point out in 2 or 3 specific aspects where the lack of proper meteorology system can hinder the efforts into mitigation or climate change adaptation? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. How do we feel?
Thank you, first of all, for these 2 questions. I address the way you asked. So first one, there are 2 aspects. One is the so-called D1 document, which can provide, it's an OML document, which can provide you quite a lot of information how legal metrologists or metrologists overall can be established and built. You had another question in this first part of the question, and as I am Swiss, I will be very neutral in my response. I would, obviously it's ironical because I'm not neutral when I have to give you a clear answer. In Switzerland, as I mentioned before, we have both aspects under one roof. Out of my experience, this works very well. What is more or less key, even if it's under 2 different or organized in 2 different entities, is the communication between. Even if you're under one roof, you can be 2 silos. So, but I'm trying to say communication is extremely important. It's not necessarily the organizational approach, it's more the communication and the flow of information between the 2 parts. The second question, I start, and I think everyone has her or his say.
So thanks. So if I go a little bit deeper on the first question, actually the D1 document is something we developed jointly with the OIML BIPM document. We know that 30-page documents aren't the most interesting thing in the world, so we've worked to create some e-learning modules which you can access off our website, take people through the principles of the D1 document, and we've also got a set of brochures in different languages that explain, again in a more readable form, the principles of the D1 document. So please contact us, myself, or Bob Joseph and his organisation, and we'd be delighted to point you towards materials that can really answer your first question.
Yeah.
Bob, final remark.
I think I still have to answer the question.
Yeah, exactly.
The second one, but very, very quickly before everyone should give a final remark. I give you one example where metrology can help, but perhaps should be faster. For instance, today I had a discussion on EV charging with someone. And when it comes to EV charging, there's infrastructure is being built in different ways. In Europe, for instance, many countries have built up the infrastructure. However, it is not regulated how you measure if you charge the correct amount. And this is definitely key because you want consumers to use it and trust and have confidence in the system. So there, for instance, we haven't achieved a common understanding, but that's a small example of kind of just out of time reasons. I think I will stop there, but thank you for the question.
And we can of course continue the discussion here after the panel discussion itself all the way. Final remark. What do we do now after this? Is there any action to be taken right after? Where do we start?
From my perspective, as I said initially, and this was why we had a diverse panel, it is very much of importance that we really different stakeholders work closely together and also just speak with one voice. I think the one voice approach for the different actors in the quality infrastructure is key.
Martin?
I'd say that the world becomes more complex. We heard about the whole question of early warning. That's probably not a discussion we would have had 5 years ago, and now it's top of the agenda. Other topics that are right at the top of the agenda that we wouldn't have addressed 5 years ago that we're working on, we're talking about instruments that trade in forests. So how does a satellite dependably measure a forest, the presence of a forest, the quality of a forest? These are measurands that our community's never engaged before. There are people getting engaged in that, working with the international organisations that coordinate the expert bodies. We want to provide the global measurement system that will underpin the measurements that are needed for the next round of COP agreements.
Perfect. That's what legal metrology and measurement science will do. What will standards do?
I think by institution cooperation fosters consumer confidence, promote sustainable trade, and enables industry to innovate with a trusted and standardized framework.
And finally, we have to change with climate change. We have to adapt. What would you say, Anil?
I just want to follow up based on what she said. On cooperation, there is a international decade of science for sustainable development. Everyone has a role to play. And I will, on behalf of UNESCO, I would like to invite all of you to contribute to that. In every scientific domain, we have to improve, but we have to make it open. In terms of climate change, just to give an answer also, for instance, if we used to have a perennial flow, which means a regular flow system, and which is no longer having, in hydrology, you monitor river level, and then velocity, and then you come up with a discharge. But if you don't have that flow for long periods of time, you cannot measure it. You have to think something else. And in ice core, for instance, you are drilling ice and measuring temperature. You don't have ice. How do you define the temperature? So you need to, you see the climate change impact is really triggering and forcing scientists to think about a different other opportunity, but also challenges to address.
So if it makes sense, it should be measured.
Yeah.
And it should be measured to make sense.
Yeah.
That's perfect. In that light, I think that's a good spirit to end up with, but we have a collaborative effort here in this issue, and we have a collaborative spirit, I think, in this entire group. As said, I think you invited everybody to continue that discussion, and I will say the same. Continue the discussion with the panel. I thank Bob, Martin, Kamala, and Anil for this discussion. It's been perfect. And for you that are here, you can run to another session on Action with Impact, which is a side event starting now. And we have also a QR code where you can share your thoughts about this session. What did you think? And what could we maybe have discussed more about? So let us know about that. And once again, thank you very much for the discussion, and thank you for showing up.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.